Now that Eleanor, the newest garrison commander for Rise of Kingdoms, is officially in the game, it's time that I make an in-depth guide for her. So if you want to know everything about the newest cavalry garrison, from her basic skill rundown, her best pairings, when she is useful, and her favorite talent builds, and finally if you should even consider investing in her as a lower spender free-to-play or a whale, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's just start off today's video by going over all of Eleanor's skills. We'll start off with her active skill here. This is a rare, like a fairly stock standard skill. She's dealing 2,300 direct damage factor, and for the next 3 seconds she's going to take 10% less skill damage. This will work on the open field. Nothing here is about being in a garrison. It's really, just if we had to put it plainly, it's a worse version of Henry's active skill. Henry's 2,300 with a 30% skill damage reduction for 5 seconds. Eleanor is only 3 seconds, and it's only a 10% reduction. So it's honestly just a weaker Henry active skill, but you'll see why her active skill is a little bit weaker as we go through the rest of her kit. But that being said, it's kind of lackluster, this active skill, but when we see her other skills, you'll see why the damage is pretty average and why the buff, especially the buff, is really, really small. Eleanor's second skill here, this is really just stats. This commander's cav units gain 20% attack, fairly stock standard, and then if she's serving as a garrison commander, her garrison will take 15% less counterattack damage. Once again, really standard amount of stats there. I don't mind the counterattack reduction. It's good against rallies, especially 1v1 situations, so not very anti-swarmy, but it is good against a rally in a one-on-one situation, or really just people who accidentally hit flags and stuff. They're not going to be dealing nearly as much damage. Eleanor's third skill, and this is probably one of the strongest skills here. First of all, she gains 15% cav defense. That's fairly average, but if she's serving as a garrison commander, whenever she's hit with a basic attack, but 10% chance to use the Lily of Wind skill, which is her active skill, and it has a cooldown of 10 seconds. This is actually a really, really solid thing to have. If this cooldown was shorter, she'd definitely be a OP garrison commander, but this really just means that when she's being swarmed or when she's just being hit in general, she can double trigger this active skill. So that is why this active skill is really not as powerful as some of the other skills, because otherwise it'd be too overpowered. Imagine double Henry active skills. I think it would be a tad too OP. So that is why Eleanor is definitely not the strongest active skill in the game. It's fairly average, but this third skill pretty much makes it much more overpowered. Keep in mind though, this double trigger whenever you're being hit is only when she is a garrison commander. She can't use it on the open field. If you could, she'd actually be a fairly viable open field commander, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Eleanor's fourth skill here, this commander's troop deals 10% more damage. That is an all damage bonus. And if they're serving as a garrison commander, for 3 seconds after they use an active skill, up to 5 nearby allied or friendly troops, including the garrison, gain a 5% damage or bonus to damage dealt. And then for every allied troop or friendly troop nearby, excluding the garrison commander themselves, this commander's troop can gain up to a 5% all damage bonus, 1% extra each time. Really, this is just giving Eleanor a 15% all damage bonus, and it can improve people who are trying to swarm a rally. It's not the most amazing, it's not the worst. It's got some situations where it's pretty nice, but really if your garrison is being heavily swarmed, this skill is going to be not nearly as valuable. You're going to miss out on the 5% bonus to Eleanor herself, and then you'll miss out on the all damage bonuses to give to your allies, because that is actually, funny enough, a fairly good thing to have. Since these all damage bonuses will help with swarming rallies, they will help with swarming down people who are swarming the flag. All of that does matter, and it does kind of add up. But without those troops nearby, Eleanor's losing all damage, and you're not getting as much value out of this fourth skill. That being said though, it does kind of synergize pretty well with that third skill and that active skill, of course, because they can trigger the active skill more and therefore trigger the extra all damage more often. Now the final skill on Eleanor, her expertise, is this commander's troop takes 5% less damage and they deal 10% more skill damage to their current target. I mean, really just self-explanatory skill, nothing crazy. It is just kind of a stat boosting skill. That being said, with Eleanor, what her best skill loadout would be, well, if she's a garrison commander, you have to expertise her. For open field, she's not a very good option. She'd be like a 5th or a 6th cav march, And once again, you'd probably want to expertise her just because you're getting a fairly big amount of stats here, 15% total on the expertise, and they're all fairly valuable stats. And the reason this is definitely a bit more important, especially if you're trying to run Eleanor on the open field, is because this expertise, it is a large chunk of stats compared to the rest of her kit, because you've got 20% attack here, you've got 15% defense, and you've got a 10% all damage bonus. That's like what in total? 45%. This is almost a third extra stats. It's like a 33% increase to the total stats of her kit. So if you want to run her on the open field, expertise only. If you want to use her on a garrison, she is expertise only. That being said, she's definitely not a very good open field commander. I can say that even without testing. Her stats are just lackluster. She's missing a lot of her kit. A lot of it's just locked behind being a garrison commander. So if you wanted to run Eleanor on the open field, you'd only run her over some really old cav commanders. Like, she's probably better than a Saladin just because the pure amount of stats and damage she has is higher. It's just literal power creep. But she isn't that much better than a Saladin. They would probably go head to head and get a fairly close trade. And she's maybe better than a Khan. She's probably better than a Cao Cao. But in most situations, you wouldn't really pick an Eleanor unless you're looking at a lot of open field cav marches. So I'll just put that out there now before we get into some of the other stuff. Now, as for the talent build on Eleanor, I did really struggle to find a way for me to visualize this without stealing it from Chiscool. So if you want to actually see who made the talent build, I stole it from Chiscool's video. I don't have any commanders with cavalry, garrison, defense, and to my knowledge, Eleanor is the only cav commander with that in the game. So the usual website I go to, ROK Talents, doesn't actually have a tree I could really use, or like something I could visualize it with. So I've stolen Chiscool's picture here, just because I don't own Eleanor, but I can explain the logic behind the build. First of all, going right up to the shield skill here, I'm not going to try to read the first bit, you're going to get 12% less skill damage. That's amazing for a garrison right off the bat. It's really, really good stats to have. And even though you are picking up a bit of march speed here, I think it is worth the amount of skill damage reduction you are going to get from such a relatively cheap amount of points. 12% skill damage reduction is more than Eleanor's active skill, which does say a lot. Also, you put some extra points into the halberd here because dealing up to 9% more damage to archer units, which is normal attack only, is definitely worth the points in my opinion, and it's very, very good against archer rallies who might be trying to attack the Eleanor garrison. As for the points that have been put into the garrison tree, the reason you go all the way up to this skill right here that I'm also not going to try read is because once again you're going to get 15% less skill damage. It's an amazing skill to have, or just talent to have in general, and it's worth the points. And then going down to impenetrable fortifications, really good. It's just taking less all damage because it's not even saying cav units. And then you just put this health in here because at this point here, because you are getting a little bit of defense. Finally, if you're looking for the full tanky experience, let me try to find a commander with the defense tree. You go right on down to Tetsudo formation. This is just a very, very nice skill to have as well, because whenever you're doing a basic attack, 10% chance to reduce all incoming damage by 15%. That's really good if it times up well with an active skill. You're going to save a ton of save wounds. And then Yin Yang, you're just going to take a lot less all damage, but you'll be dealing less all damage. I think it's worth the trade-off. You're going to be up about 1.5% of stats here, and in my opinion, that is worth the amount of points that you're putting in. And then loose formation's always great, because once again, you're reducing your skill damage by 9%. So this talent build's going to give you something like a 25, even maybe I think it's 27% skill damage reduction. Maybe it's more. It could be 31. I don't know the exact percent. Kind of high percentage of skill damage reduction you are getting between all the skills here, and then just extra all damage reductions and stuff. It's really making Eleanor a fairly tanky garrison, and it's improving her anti-swarm, because when you look at Eleanor's kit, it is not very anti-swarm heavy, which is definitely one of her bigger disadvantages. So this is definitely the build that I'm putting back on screen again. Again, thank you to Chiscool. I stole it from him. I haven't messaged him, so hopefully he doesn't get mad. But that is definitely the best build to roll with, and it is the build I would personally use on her. Now, as for Eleanor's best garrison pairings, there is a few situations we should consider here. In a situation where you're being swarmed, I mean, Eleanor with Heraclius is just the best garrison because it is very, very easy to reinforce. Heraclius is heavy in on anti-swarm. I don't think there's a garrison commander that beats Heraclius in terms of anti-swarm, and it's just going to trade pretty decent. Plus Heraclius, I mean, no matter who they release, they're really going to work pretty decently with him. So an Eleanor with an Heraclius, it's a good pairing. It'll work perfectly fine. And to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure Eleanor's usually the primary in this situation, just because the leadership tree isn't as good as the cav tree. Also, you can't get the cavalry gear bonuses if you have Heraclius primary. You have to use leadership gear. So Heraclius with Eleanor, easily one of the best anti-swarm garrisons that you can get currently, and for Cavs, it is the best anti-swarm. In my opinion, it's going to beat out that Jan Ziska garrison. In terms of when you're not being swarmed though, let's say it's a pass situation especially, a Jan Ziska primary Eleanor secondary is better, because we know the skill tree is really good in 1v1 situations, or situations where you're not being swarmed very much, so the open field, it's just going to make your trades way better. But when you're being swarmed, you're going to get destroyed if you have the skill tree. That's why Jan Ziska in a pass situation would be one of the best commanders to be using, and him with an Eleanor is probably the current best pass garrison in the game by far. So Jan Ziska Eleanor, really, really good pass garrison commander to be running, and it is going to work extremely well. One last possible garrison pairing is an Eleanor primary with a Jan Ziska secondary, and this pairing really comes to light in forts and mainly flags. If you don't have a Heraclius, or you just want a pure cav garrison. In those situations, Eleanor with Jan Ziska is a fairly anti-swarm garrison, because you've got the defense tree, it's really tanky, there's a lot of skill damage reductions going on, there's a lot of all damage reductions, loose formation, you've got yin yang, got Tetsudo formation. All those things are going to help Eleanor in terms of just being more tanky, and then Jan Ziska is going to be there for more damage, more stats, a little bit of anti-swarm throughout his kit, stuff like that, which is always nice. But that being said, in most situations, when you're being swarmed, if it's a very heavy swarm, I'd rather go with a Heraclius. So if they're swarming non-stop and they're not letting up, Heraclius will be better, because even though it may be a slightly worse trade, the garrison will stay alive just because of how tanky Heraclius is. But if it's slightly swarming, maybe they got like one player that swarms, and by the time their marchers die, the rally's dead, stick with the Ziska. It's actually going to get you more kills and deal a lot more damage to your enemies. But if you're being heavily swarmed, it will go down, so you should definitely keep that in mind. Heraclius, more reliable, but worse trades. Jan Ziska, better trades, but more risky, especially if they can swarm it very well, as long as Eleanor is the primary. But if you want full-on tankiness, you just go Eleanor Heraclius and you're set. In terms of open field pairings, I will put it out there for people who are considering around 5 marches. There's nothing too amazing. I mean, of course, if you slap her with any meta commander, it's going to be her best pairing, because she doesn't have anything unique in her kit. She's just a generic damage open field, or not even open field, she's a generic damage commander. She's not very good on the open field, most of her stats are for the garrison, but if you do so choose to use an Eleanor on the open field, I'd say secondary to someone like Bertrand isn't too bad. Secondary to a commander, a really old commander, maybe you could go a Saladin Eleanor. Really, it's just depending on how many cav marches you are running at that point, but I would say the better the commander you can pair her with, the better she is going to do, since she's just a stat commander. But I wouldn't say she's a good investment for the open field, since that would just be a very foolish thing to say, since she's really just a garrison commander. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about with Eleanor is just open field strength and garrison strength. When do I think she's going to work well? What does she really counter? And finally, is she really good? And in my opinion, or like really from what I've seen, she's not an open field commander. I know I've been giving you open field pairings, and I have said multiple times, she's not open field powerful. She's only there 5 or 6 cav marches. Very, very few players are going to do that, and the only reason you'd run her is just because she's got better damage and slightly better stats than some very old commanders like Chandragupta or Saladin or Khan. These commanders that are super outdated, Eleanor is going to be stronger than them, just for the pure reason that really, she's a power creep. It's just power creep over time. She's going to be stronger, and it's not even that much stronger. And I would expect that by the time new commanders do release into the game, Eleanor will be like pretty much fully out of the meta, especially once new calves release. So I wouldn't even consider her as an open field commander. You can only use her if you're expertising her for the garrison as like a side thing, but she's definitely not a pickup for low spenders or free-to-plays. In terms of garrison, she's not the best anti-swarm garrison in the game. I think Gorgo Heraclius is still a bit better on anti-swarm. There's a bit more tankiness going in that march. Gorgo, a little bit more tankier. The smite damage, definitely a little bit more unique. And she's just overall better in that regard. But that being said, Eleanor does have quite a bit of power in terms of a pass and a fort situation where you often don't get swarmed as hard or you just got more troops. Because in a fort, I think you can have around 3 million troops, if I'm not mistaken, which is obviously a lot more than a flag. So Eleanor inside of a fort is going to be better than inside of a flag, just because forts are way harder to swarm down than a flag is to swarm down. So that's definitely going to help Eleanor with her almost lack of anti-swarm, and it's good in that situation. And when you put her in a pass, she's the best pass garrison in the game with a Jan Ziska as the primary, just because they've got that skill tree going. You've got Eleanor's double active skill ripping through the rally, and you can't swarm down a pass. It's almost impossible, and if you're even considering swarming it, you're going to take hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dead, so I wouldn't be swarming passes, and that's where Eleanor really does exceed, and is a very, very powerful commander. But in terms of the open field, not a very good choice to go with. So that leaves us with the final question. Do you invest in Eleanor of Aquitaine? And I think the answer is she's a garrison commander. Only invest in her if you're a garrison player. If you're looking to be a garrison, you can consider investing in her. But unlike Gorgo, unlike Henry, all these previous kind of open field, kind of rally releases, Eleanor is not one of those commanders. She's not a good open field commander. She's purely just for the garrison. So if you do need a garrison commander, she's worth it. Unlike Lapu Lapu, you can actually use her, and she will be a fairly strong, if not meta garrison. And I think she will stay that way until the next calves, of course, release, and may even stay that way for a little bit longer after those calves do release. So Eleanor, good investment for what that's worth if you're a garrison player. Bad investment for the open field, and not a free-to-play commander at all. I'm not going to get her, obviously. All free-to-play low spenders should be skipping her. I think she's very comparable to Ditto. She's kind of forgettable once more commanders do release, especially once a commander that counters her does release. So Eleanor, I don't think she's going to be super meta for a very long time, but she is a strong garrison commander right now, and she will be fairly powerful for the next upcoming few months. So if you're a whale, she's worth it, but if you're not, I would probably skip her. That's really all you need to know about Eleanor. Open field, no. Garrison, yes. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, if you did enjoy the video, then you'll probably enjoy being in my Discord server as well. You can ask questions about anything, archers, infantry, calves, those disgusting siege, whatever it may be. My Discord is a great place to go, and you can always leave at any time if you don't like it. The link to my Discord will be in the pinned comment and also in the description, so I highly recommend checking it out. Even if you just want to say hello to me, I will pretty much always respond. Now I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.